Home Secretary, last month I met with your colleague, the Safeguarding Minister, alongside a leading child abuse lawyer, David Greenwood, who has acted on behalf of many of those victims and survivors of the Rotherham cases. And we presented a dossier to your department which outlined that they're concluding that there is potentially tens of thousands of children across Keighley and the Bradford district that have been exploited going back to the 1990s. And I hope that this has made it to your desk. And despite growing calls for a local inquiry, the dossier also listed the documented refusals that we've had at a local authority level and indeed across the mayoralty as to the fact that we should not have a local inquiry, which is deeply concerning to me. So the questions I've got is, are you worried about the situation in the Bradford district? And does it not set off alarm bells to you that local leaders in Bradford were rejecting the prospect of a local inquiry within hours of your statement that you gave to the floor of the House in January, well before they would have had time to read the contents of your announcement, indeed to analyse it properly?
Just to, I suppose, update you in terms of where we are on this. We obviously asked Baroness Casey to do the audit of the nature and scale and patterns of child sexual exploitation and abuse, the different gang abuse right across the country. She has asked for a short extension. I've obviously written to the committee based on that. We, I think, do need her audit to inform the sort of next steps and decisions around the local inquiries. We are clear that we've said from the start we would support at least 5 local inquiries. With Oldham, we are working underway already, but we are waiting for Baroness Casey's report back. So I do recognise, and the Safeguarding Minister has recognised, the particular case that you've raised around Bradford. We are waiting for Baroness Casey's report before we can take the next step. And
I completely acknowledge that, and thank you for that response, Home Secretary. And I will look at that report when it gets released. But the reality of it is that report is not looking specifically at local authorities. It's more focusing on police forces. So the point that I want to put to you is, at Bradford Council, we were given the reasoning by our leader that a report would be too expensive for a local authority to pursue. And my understanding is, based on the announcement you gave back in January, that there'll be about a £5 million allocation for 5 local audits, local inquiries to take place. So if Bradford was to be one of those and that money was allocated, would you expect the leadership at Bradford to get behind that?
Well, we have identified funding to ensure that we can make sure there is additional funding for local inquiries. Clearly, that is important. And once the Casey review and the Casey audit has reported back to us, we will set out those next steps, both about how we will then expect local inquiries to be taken forward and also the funding support that we will give. Obviously, we want all local organisations and agencies, including councils, including other local organisations, to support local inquiries. I think that has been immensely important. We are looking at the overarching thing because there is clearly an issue about policing. There is also an issue about local authority responsibilities, because very often victims were in care or were in areas where other social services had engagement with victims, and so there are responsibilities there. On the policing side, as you'll know, I have also always said the most important thing is to get perpetrators behind bars.
And may I just expand on bringing it back to local authorities? And this is, don't forget, this is a local authority that has had children's services taken away from it under the previous administration with a new trust structure set up. So there's deep levels of concern about what's going on in Bradford. One of the reasons was, as I've already said, was it will cost a huge amount of money. The second reasoning was the leader of Bradford Council argued that the inquiry, if we had one in Bradford, would simply be paying somebody to write another report and that there would be no new learning. So can I just put the point to you? Do you agree with Bradford Council's local leadership in thinking that these local inquiries will provide absolutely no new information or learning?
So what we found from the experience of the Telford inquiry, and also actually you go back into the initial Rotherham inquiries that took place, the two different Rotherham reviews that took place even back 10 years ago, one by Alexis Jay and one by Baroness Louise Casey, is that in different forms, and there were three different kinds of reviews that took place. The Alexis Jay one, the Louise Casey one, which was under Local Government Act powers, and then the Telford inquiry, which was set out locally. In each of those cases, they uncovered important new local information, but also they provided a basis for action to be taken. And in particular, action to be taken both to go after perpetrators and to ensure that new standards are in place. So, as I've said, we will take forward the next steps around those local inquiries is when we have the audit back from Baroness Casey. But we are clear that local authorities can play inquiries can play a very important role in this process.
Which is excellent to hear. The point that I'm trying to make here is local authorities are coming up with excuses. I'm absolutely seeing that within my own area of Keighley and the wider Bradford district as to why not to have one. Will it be the case where we have local authorities that refuse to put themselves forward to be having an inquiry, that you, as using your powers as the Home Secretary, will step in? Because why on earth are we allowing it to be a voluntary approach at the moment, which is effectively allowing local authorities to mark their own homework? So will it be the case, if Bradford Council continue to refuse to have one, that you, as the Home Secretary, when we have presented a dossier to you and made such a huge amount of levels of concern, that you would step forward and make Bradford Council get behind your calls for a local inquiry to take place?
The first thing I would say is these have to be independent inquiries. So these can't be inquiries that are done by local authorities. They have to be independent inquiries, and it's only independent inquiries that we will provide funding for. That's what happened with the Telford inquiry. Although it was initiated by the local authority and local organisations, it was then conducted independently. That is crucial. I do understand the questions you're raising, but some of these are the points we will respond to once we get Baroness Casey's audit, because part of what she's looking at is what are the key areas, what are the key issues that are raised in terms of what we know at the moment. And we need to ensure that the framework for those local inquiries and also other reforms that we will need to introduce reflects that evidence and reflects that information. This needs to look at issues around both being able to get to the truth in terms of the police investigations, but also making sure there are proper accountability mechanisms in place. So we're alive to all of those points. We raised some of those points actually at the very beginning of this process when we identified some of the principles that we needed to reflect. We obviously, I think when we had agreed this, the timings for this, we might have had responses earlier, but we are waiting for Baroness Casey's audit, and I hope other people understand that's important.